In global crises past, the American people banded together against the common enemy, the Great Depression, World Wars I and II, September 11th, at least at first. But today, in the face of an entirely new kind of attack, we find ourselves in what historians are calling the most polarized era since the Civil War. A recent CBS News YouGov poll we've mentioned before found 86% of Democrats say they don't trust President Trump for accurate information on coronavirus, while 87% of Republicans say they don't trust the national media. A similar number of Republicans do trust Trump. On the other hand, there was rare bipartisan unanimity on that $2 trillion stimulus package. So, in which direction are we going? I'm joined now by Daniel Drezner. He's professor of international politics at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and a regular contributor to the Washington Post. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Jim.
So let's start with the president. I know you're not a huge fan, but putting aside yesterday the mandatory that impeachment was a hoax and there are too many homeless people in Nancy Pelosi's district, he did almost what he's supposed to be doing yesterday, did he not? He was pretty much honest about the severity of the crisis, no?
Yeah, after approximately 2 months of sort of claiming this was going to go away or not be as bad as the regular influenza or what have you, he was clear finally in sort of stating the possible severity of the crisis.
So, assuming that he did downplay things, some people think he cooked the books regularly on a whole set of facts, very slow to act. Despite all those negatives, the most recent polls I've seen, a slight majority of the American people think he's doing a good job on coronavirus. He has the highest approval ratings of his presidency. Is that purely a function of the rally around the flag thing? Is that all it is?
Yes. Pretty much. So you're dealing with a situation in which, much like previous crises, think 9/11, or think immediately even after the Newtown shooting under the Obama administration, or the Oklahoma City bombing with the Clinton administration, presidents usually experience some sort of bump in terms of their approval rating, regardless of how they handle it. Even going back to Jimmy Carter, who's received an approval bump when the U.S. Embassy was seized by Iranian students. The thing that stands out about Trump is that his bump has been surprisingly modest. And if you compare him to either past presidents during the crises that I listed or current governors that have had to cope with these crises, think Andrew Cuomo or Charlie Baker for that matter, the bump has been much more modest on the Trump side.
But one thing for which he took a lot of heat, the cost can't be greater than you can't let the cure be worse than the problem. You agreed with that in your column. It just seemed that your concern was he didn't have the skills to do what you called the cost-benefit analysis, correct?
That's correct. I mean, obviously, you don't necessarily want to deep six of the economy, to save just a handful of people. There are genuine costs and benefits in terms of this calculation. The problem is that you're dealing with a president who was listening, at least at that point, primarily only to his Wall Street friends and not realizing that, in fact, the best way to jumpstart the economy is to extinguish the coronavirus as much as possible.
So I'm sort of sick of the present. So can we talk about the future, which you address in one of your pieces, too? As I said in the lead-in to you, Dan, on one level, Congress, which is as polarized as anything on the planet, had unanimity on the biggest stimulus bill ever. The public seems to be widely divided, and if you go beyond the public, virtually every university is shutting down except Jerry Falwell Jr. Liberty University brings the kids back. 12 kids at least get the infection. Will this change that divide? Will we be any different in that respect when it's over, or was that congressional thing just a little tiny moment in time?
I think there's grounds for cautious optimism here, if for no other reason that the conservative intellectuals that have tried to claim this is overblown or that this is all a hoax now have to cope with two facts. The first is that Trump himself has now acknowledged that this is very serious, that he would describe it right now as a success if we have, less than $200,000.
That's what he said,
people dead. The second thing is just simply you can't debate a virus. You can claim that, it's a hoax, and you can try to bring people back to your university, or that it's overblown. What you can't do is stop people from getting sick or getting severely sick. And so this is a situation where people might be willing to disregard what the media says or what Democrats have said right up until the moment their neighbor or their daughter or they themselves get sick.
Well, let me talk about another thing where I may be unduly optimistic, which I almost never am. I remember in 1996, like it was yesterday, when Bill Clinton said in his State of the Union, the era of big government is over. I practically wept, by the way. I was a big government kind of guy. Last Friday was big government on steroids, $2.2 trillion. One of your colleagues in the Washington Post, E.J. Dionne, wrote a great line in an opening in one of his columns. The pandemic makes all of us a little bit more socialist. So is the era of big government going to come back when this is over? Trump's talking about an infrastructure package yesterday, or again, is that just a moment in time?
That might be a little more substantive, because if nothing else, the surprising thing is that the government, as you said, just signed a bill where $2 trillion is going to be borrowed and interest rates are at rock bottom lows. So, bear in mind, immediately after the Great Depression, the 2008 financial crisis, there was that big infamous 2010 letter from conservative economists claiming that unless Obama dealt with the deficit, you would see the U.S. turn into Greece with hyperinflation and so on and so forth. It's tough to find critics now claiming that the U.S. cannot borrow significant sums of money without necessarily all that much in the way of inflation or higher interest rates. So this could lead to a situation where there is a more ambitious government initiative.
Last thing about the future is I want to quote your last line in a recent column. My biggest fear is not getting the virus. It's that there will never be another day that I am not angry. Angry about what, Dan?
So I have a book that's coming out next week called The Toddler in Chief, what Donald Trump teaches us about the modern presidency. I'll show you. I'll even show it to you right here.
There it is. Yes.
See the cover. Yes. And one of the sentences I wrote in that book is that based on Trump's behavior over the first 3 years, the way in which we would expect him to cope with an actual crisis, including a global pandemic, is truly frightening. And we've seen this on display. There are a number of decision points in which Trump could have, or a president could have made this much better to deal with. And the fact is he didn't. So the U.S. is now the leading source of coronavirus infection. And we're in for, as he said, a brutal 2 weeks coming up. So I'm incredibly angry that a competent president, whether it was a Bill Clinton or a Hillary Clinton, or even maybe a Ted Cruz, would have probably handled this an order of magnitude better than Donald Trump.
Dan, thanks so much. Appreciate your time. By the way, I want to let people at home know that was not a softball setup to the book. I didn't even know about it in advance, but I'm looking forward to it. Dan Drezner, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.